Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I'm here for my LPL Round 2 overview and analysis of both of the series that we got in Round 2 of the LPL playoffs. Some really exciting games, obviously. I'm looking pretty good when it comes to predictions right now. I uploaded my Round 1 LPL analysis just a couple of days ago, and earlier today, my LCK Round 1 analysis has also gone up. So far, I am 4 for 4 in playoff predictions. Let's see if I can keep that undefeated streak going here today. It's a lot of really good action, a lot of in-depth analysis of both series. So if you guys are enjoying this, let me know down in the comment section below. I love going in-depth on all of these series with you guys, kind of give you a better idea as to what's happening in these series, because there's a lot of action all around the world, and I know not everybody has time to watch everything. So hopefully I can be the one to help you catch up, but I don't want to waste too much of your time. Let's go ahead and jump right into our first series of Round 2, and it's going to be EDG, Edward Gaming, taking on FunPlus Phoenix. Really interesting matchup on paper that I didn't really get to discuss in a lot of clarity at the end of last episode, but EDG should be the better team here. Going into it, those are more my thoughts. My matchup of the series here is definitely going to be the jungle matchup, as you can see on your screen, between Junjia and Clid. I really think that if Junjia can show up and keep Clid from going off on the enemy team, that EDG has a really, really good chance of being able to win this series. But let's go ahead and see what happened. Let's jump into Game 1 here, and Game 1 was an EDG win, and it was not all that close. It was pretty much a blowout in every lane. Everybody on EDG was playing well this game. Viper was playing well, Mako was playing well, Flandre was playing well, Scout was playing well. Even Junjia on the Trundle, his scoreline doesn't look phenomenal, but he was facilitating a ton for the rest of the team, kind of being the one that has to bite the bullet and lose his KDA in order for the team to do well. But overall, just a really solid game from EDG from start to finish. I want to give my player of the game shout out to actually Flandre here. I think Broadcast gave it to Viper, and I get it, the Kalista was doing a lot of damage, especially in lane, really taking advantage of that Pyke pick that FPX went for, trying to get the early kill lane pressure. Viper and Mako did a great job of countering that and became a huge issue later in the game, but you gotta give credit where credit is due, and for me, Flandre is the player of the game here on the Kennen in Game 1. A great Game 1 from him. He's someone who's been a little up and down, I think, over the course of the season, but as is the case, I think, with a majority of EDG, over, I'd say, what is the past 2-ish weeks, he has, like, ridiculously turned around his fortunes. Him, Scout, Mako, all of them, I think, have been a lot better over the past few weeks, and Flandre continues that here. Absolutely dumpstering Summit in the top lane. Wasn't even all that close in the Kennen Gragas matchup, which I honestly don't think is, like, super Kennen favored. I don't think it's not Kennen favored, but it's not like it's not like it's a horrible matchup for Gragas. I honestly think Flandre just played it better, and he became such a nuisance for FPX in teamfights. There was absolutely nothing they could do about that ultimate. It was going to destroy them. But yeah, big shout out to Viper and Mako as well. Going into a kind of scary kill lane here of Zeri Pyke. Obviously, if the Pyke can get going and get rolling in the early game, if both Zeri and Pyke are online, you're going to have a really tough time actively dealing with that as Kalista. But Mako does a good job of keeping the lane in check, and Viper capitalizes on it, getting super fed, getting ahead, and getting to a point where really he's just going to be stronger than the Zeri throughout most of the game. That's the thing with Kalista that I think a lot of people underappreciate about her, is yes, she is an early game marksman, but she is a marksman that I think does do considerably better than the, say like Lucian in the late game, because her range really isn't all that bad, and with attack speed, she can do a ton of damage in a very short amount of time in a teamfight. Her burst is actually incredible. So I actually think picking Kalista here is overall a pretty good matchup, especially if you can get ahead, which you should be able to, especially if Mako plays like this and Hang plays like this as well. But Scout doing a really good job of just playing with Junjia and playing the whole map. Unfortunately, Junjia, like I said, kind of being the one that has to die a lot in these circumstances in order for the fights to go well. But he's Trundle. That's his job. He's the tank here. Scout does a good job of just being your average Sylas, right? Like going into Akali, not letting Akali get ahead. That's a huge thing that Scout does here, and just solidifying the game, I think, for EDG. Overall, I think they played really well, mostly top and bot lane, but Flandre is going to get my player of the game. Viper and Mako very much second on that list. As for FPX, a little bit of a rough first loss here, because I think that they were a little bit outmatched in terms of gameplay. I honestly don't hate the draft decisions. Your big, go-to here is you just want to kill. You want to kill. It's pick lane. It's going for picks all the time. Akali, Pyke, Gragas, Wukong even. Like, you just have the opportunity to do so much damage early on that you're really just hoping you put yourself at a numbers advantage in most scenarios. But the Pyke Zeri lost early. Mako, like I said, did a really good job of punishing the Pyke pick, which is rather risky in lane. Of course, you can get caught as that champion. You are ridiculously frail, and if you're not in a position to be safe there, Viper and Mako are absolutely going to take advantage of it, and they did. And then, unfortunately, Kair couldn't get online either. I think this comp really does rely on either Zeri or Akali being super duper fed. We've seen some Akalis in Pro get really strong, but Sylas is definitely a good pick into Akali, generally speaking, and Scout played the matchup better. That really is just about how it went. Kair can have a lot of impact on the map, but so can Scout, and so oftentimes it's really just about which one of these two was going to play better in the Sylas-Akali matchup, and very much it was the Sylas in this one. But that's not even talking about the top two here, Summit and Clid, who I think both got pretty decently outplayed in this game. Clid got very outplayed by Junjia just in terms of map pressure, and that's mostly been Clid's problem for a majority of the year. It's not that he hasn't played well in their wins, and honestly, I think he's been underrated overall by the community, but Clid in their losses has definitely been a little bit of an issue. He does not play super well from behind, and I think that's definitely been exploited by a few teams. Junjia definitely doing that here. And then Summit just got dumpstered in the top lane. There's really no other way to put it. He lost that matchup to Flandre pretty hard. Flandre had a huge impact on the game later, and Summit was doing pretty much nothing on the Gragas. Very much a Flandre favored matchup, but Summit and Clid both have to be better. Hang to that same extent, both have to be better if FPX wants to have even a shot in this series really at all. So takeaways, like, really good game from EDG. We're going to be really happy. Pretty clean from top to bottom. Really not a lot of things to criticize from them. As for FPX, like, you have to be a little bit more decisive in your actual lane matchups. Pretty much every lane lost, and not from a macro sense. Pretty much every lane lost 1v1 or 2v2. And so that really needs to pick up. You need to improve your micro decision making here, and that's really going to be the, like, if you can't do that, the series is basically over as it is. But moving into game 2, can they do that? In game 2, they definitely did not. Game 2 was very much another EDG-favored victory. This time, mostly the bot lane. Like, I do want to give a shout-out to Flandre, but, like, if you thought game 1 wasn't all that close, game 2 was even less close. This was very much a demolition from EDG. They didn't even need objectives in this game. They kind of ignored them for the most part and just got kills and towers instead, which was phenomenal for them. But this is what happens when you let the best AD carry in the LPL, I said it. Some people are going to be mad at me for saying that, but the best AD carry in the LPL and Viper get Sivir, get super fed on it with a Yuumi on their team, and then have a bunch of engage and peel outside of it. He's just going to take over the game, and he absolutely did here. Viper played phenomenally. He's going to get my player of the game. He misses it in game 1. He gets it here in game 2. Got to give credit where credit's due. Mako played a good game, even though Yuumi, it's like, how good of a game did you actually play? But I mean, this bot lane was such a force, especially towards the back half. There was absolutely nothing FPX was even possible to do. Like, there was no one on FPX's team that even had remotely a chance to fight the Sivir Yuumi combo, even without the rest of the team. But, like, with the rest of the team, the 5v5, it was completely over by 10 minutes. Like, it was not even close. So Viper and Mako doing a great job and already proving that they're just outclassing LWX and Hang in this series. But you got to give credit where credit is due as well on the rest of the map. Scout did a great job of destroying Kair in lane again. Kair actually takes the Sylas from him this time, and he goes to the Ahri pick, which I think is actually pretty Sylas favored, at least in my experience. But, you know, doesn't matter. When Scout, if you're just better, like I always say, execution matters significantly more than matchup, at least in League of Legends. I think there are other MOBAs where that's not true, but in League, if you're the better player, you will often show it. And I think Scout absolutely did that in this matchup where he obliterated him on the Ahri, was able to go across the map. The 5v5s were awesome. Junjia and Flandre were also great. Flandre not super involved in this game, but he had destroyed Summit in the top lane. Another really bad game from Summit. Flandre on the Renekton, a pick we're going to see from him a couple of times in this series. He does really well in that. And then Junjia on the Vi. Really like this pick for Junjia. Someone who can actively engage and be kind of a frontline helper. You know, just kind of assist the bot lane. That's kind of been Junjia's role. We talked about this when when we did the EDG breakdown in the playoff primer, where I just basically said, with JJ, a lot of the focus was on mid lane and getting Scout ahead to be able to roam around, where for Junjia, I think he just skips the middleman and goes straight to the bottom lane, does his best to help out Viper, does his best to help out Mako, and I think that's really simplified the process and helped EDG out a lot. He did that in this game, was able to get the Sivir super duper fed against the Zeri, and from there, Viper just took it out of control. EDG just stomped this game. It was not all that close. As for FPX, yikes. Like, kind of a similar game to game 1 for them in terms of The bot lane just getting outplayed a little bit, but not to the point where they look awful, just to the point where they're just not as good, right? And Care losing the macro matchup to Scout, where he's going to be able to run around, and then the top side really being the biggest issue, whether it be Summit, whether it be Clid. Both of them have not been good in the first 2 games here. Summit gets obliterated again. He gets a dud of the game for the 2nd game in a row here. The Ornn game was not good. He not only got beat by Flandre multiple times in the top lane, in a matchup that honestly really shouldn't be that bad for Ornn. But then moving on to the team fights, he could barely even get ult off in a lot of these team fights because he was dying so instantaneously. Really not a good look for Summit. A very bad start to the series for him. And then you have Clid, who again gets out jungled and out macroed heavily by Junji. At this time, it's a little bit more understandable because he's playing as Viego into Vi, which I think is just a pretty awful matchup for the Viego. It's really difficult to get. It's really difficult to actually pressure the Vi at all as Viego unless you have teammates that are ahead and willing to help you. And of course, he just didn't have a single lane able to help him. So overall, just a bad game for FPX. That's 2 in a row, 2 stomps in a row. EDG very much looks like the more dominant team, and I think a lot of people saw this coming. EDG was, on paper, the much better team out of these 2, and I think they've definitely proven that over the first 2 games. But is it going to be a sweep, or can FPX pick up at least 1 game here? Going into Game 3, we are looking at an FPX win. They are able to pick up a win here. And it's off the back of Care. Care gets the Ahri, which I actually think has been a very good pick for him over the course of the season. And he's able to do really well on it. Even if it's not a perfect game here for FPX, which it isn't, I certainly think that it's the best that they could do with the circumstances given. But let's talk about the strategy that they used to get here. Essentially, it was just try to outplay them. And quite frankly, I get it. Like, you've been out macro 2 games in a row. Just throw balls to the wall and try to go out there and win. They did that here. Care with another really, really solid performance. He had a very good series in the round 1 series against OMG. He was probably the biggest reason he was my player of the series, why they were able to win that series. And he did a great job here, kind of bouncing back after what was a relatively rough couple of games. The Ahri comes out here into the Taliyah. Taliyah can often have a pretty decent advantage here in terms of macro pressure, but the Ahri can do a great job to minimize that by not only getting really fed herself by catching waves and pushing into tower, but also when Taliyah has to return, that's a great window for Ahri to make plays with her jungler or to make plays in the bot lane. And I think Care did a really good job of knowing the timings and knowing how to play the matchup. Overall, he took advantage of some positioning mistakes in some team fights as well. Gotta point out Viper, love him to death, but not the best game of all time from him on the Sivir. Obviously, you can be really safe on the Sivir, even if you're behind, but you gotta know when to use that spell shield right, and unfortunately, Care was able to catch Viper with a couple of charms at a couple of points in the game, and that was just, if Sivir gets hit, she's dead. So, definitely points to be made there. Care kind of carrying FPX in this game, but shout out a bit to the bot lane as well. LWX and Hang, definitely a good performance from them, especially in comparison to what they had put on in the first 2 games where they had basically just been completely outclassed by Viper and Mako over the course of those 2. They definitely bounced back a lot better here. 3rd game in a row for LWX on the Zeri. Definitely surprising to me. I get that pick everybody feels is really strong right now, but quite frankly, if you're not the better bot laner, it's difficult to make that work. You do have to put yourself in a decently advantageous position. Fortunately for LWX in Game 3, he was able to get that off of the back of, like I said, Viper positioning a little bit more poorly and not nearly as much help from the jungle and mid in the bot lane. So LWX gets a little bit of a lead, and he does a really good job to maintain that. Hang does a good job of keeping him alive, keeping Ahri alive as well. And then, of course, I'm always going to talk about it. When you have a Jax in the top lane and he gets any sort of gold on him, that all of a sudden changes how the enemy team has to play the entire game, because somebody on the enemy team has to deal with Jax. And if they do that, and you have a good Jax player that is willing to play with the team and willing to play around them, you can put yourself in very favorable plus positions because of that. Whether it be man up 5v4s or 4v3s, whatever the case, you can often put yourself in a position where you are a man up in a team fight and you have a huge advantage. So playing around Jax is obviously huge, and I think they did a decent job of that this game, even if Summit wasn't the perfect Jax player. Overall, even if Clid wasn't great this game, I don't think he made like a ridiculous amount of plays. I think a lot of it was on Care. I still think that FPX played easily their best game of the series here, and definitely a good showing for a team that I think had been blown out in the first 2 games. Not going to hit the panic button on EDG or anything. It's 1 game. Everybody loses 1 game, I think, every once in a while. And I actually think they had some positives here, even if the bot lane didn't perform up to expectations and didn't perform how they performed, certainly in the first 2 games. I actually thought Junjia played a really good game here on the Wukong. He was making a lot of plays around the map, and honestly, he out-jungled Clid for a majority of this game in terms of macro pressure, but there was only so much he could do when both his mid lane and bot lane lost. So shout out to Junjia. I thought he played a pretty good game, and honestly, he's definitely earned his spot in the starting 5 for EDG at this point. But everybody else kind of lost. Flandre just wasn't nearly on the same level as Summit in the top lane. Part of that is matchup. I think if you don't win super early on Renekton, obviously it's very difficult to deal with the Jax in the late game as a melee bruiser, especially one that is supposed to fall off late. So not a great matchup there overall in draft. And then, Scout, like I already noted, lost to Care in terms of the macro pressure and just in terms of the 1v1. And Viper and Mako just weren't on their game in this one against LWX and Hang. It happens. It's not a perfect game, but not the worst in the world. Definitely a good win for FPX, so kind of sets them a little bit on the right track, maybe gives them a little bit of confidence moving into Game 4. Do they have enough confidence to send this to a Silver Scrapes Game 5? Do they? They, unfortunately, do not. Love them to death, but EDG is going to be able to take the Game 4 here, and I don't think that's going to surprise all that many people. A very good win here for EDG off of the back of Viper and Mako just coming right back at you. Care goes to his classic Yone here, what he dominated OMG on in that final game earlier in the week. Unfortunately, it's just not enough. He doesn't play a particularly great game, gets outplayed a little bit by Scout in lane, and pretty much everybody on EDG shows up to this, but obviously, I gotta shout out Viper and Mako. They pull out the Lucian Nami here to try and quell a lot of this early aggression that LWX and Hang have really been going for in the 2v2 early in the series. They go back to that Zeri Lulu trying to continue the momentum that they had in Game 3, but unfortunately, it just isn't going to be there against a more early game focused bot lane. It's really, really tough to play that Zeri Lulu into a bot lane that wants to kill you over and over again if Zeri is not super duper safe in that matchup, but that just means that Viper's going to get super ahead anyways, and they didn't play nearly as safe as they should have. Anyways, Viper and Mako were able to get their lead, and they were able to snowball the game, basically completely out of control from that point. Viper is easily my player of the game here on the Lucian. A great game from him, and a great game from Mako on the Nami. Obviously, we've seen some up and down Nami performances from quite a few people over the past few days. This was one of the better ones. I think Lucian Nami is generally one of those lanes that you can really only pull off if you know you're the better players, and EDG knew they were the better players in this matchup over the course of these 3 games, and they felt comfortable to pull it out here. But let's give credit where credit is due to Junjia as well. Someone who I really don't think is going to get a lot of the credit that he absolutely deserves for this series, but he was really doing a great job at managing the map, and most notably making sure that Clid had absolutely no impact on the game. I know a lot of people talk about how Clid is so bad, and he's been so bad all year long. Obviously, I've disagreed with that vehemently over the course of the year. I think this team, when they win, needs Clid. But Junjia did a great job of making sure that he took away that win condition. There was a reason that was my matchup of the series, because if Clid could not get going, if Junjia did a good job of managing the map and making sure Clid was always on the back foot, then EDG was very likely just going to be more talented and going to win this series. And they did. A great tank game in the top lane from Flandre. Something that often you don't really see from him. He's definitely much more of the aggressive player, but he's willing to go on that Ornn here in Game 4, and he does pull it off. Scout was also fine on the Azir. Honestly, everybody played well in this series, but I gotta give a big shout out to Viper, Mako, and Flandre, who really felt like the superstars for EDG. And then for FPX, definitely a tough way to lose your season. You want to rely on the player that's kind of been getting you here, and Care, honestly, for the most part, at least in the playoffs, has been that guy. So I understand wanting to put him on the Yone. I don't love pairing him with Wukong and Zeri as the 2 other main carries. Obviously, you have the Kennen in the top lane, but at the same time, I'm still not in love with that idea, and I think part of it just didn't pay off here. Care was just not very good on the Yone. He got outplayed by Scout in lane. There really wasn't a ton he could do. Junjia was always there to upset his lane state. And then by the time we got to the mid game, Viper was so much stronger than him that there was really nothing he was going to be able to do to actively affect the outcome of the game. And I really think that was probably the reason they lost so handily here in this final game. Even if someone like Summit did have quite a bit of gold on the Kennen in the top lane, there really was no way for him to use it anywhere on the map. Those ultimates were doing a lot of damage, but once that was done, there was really not a lot of follow-up from FPX. Clid was super far behind, Care was super far behind, LWX was super far behind. They just didn't have the firepower to actually be able to compete here without some miraculous fights. Overall, let's talk about FPX. Their season was disappointing. I think that is certainly what people are going to say. A lot of people saw this team, me included, as like a top 6 team-ish on paper heading into the split. And I stand by that. I still think they should have been a lot better than what they ended up being. But they did rally a little bit towards the back half of the split. They were really, really bad. They started off in a deep hole, 0-5 or something like that. They were able to rally back, get into playoffs, and even win a playoff series. I think in some ways it's a disappointment, but in some ways it is an overachieve an overachievement of what they were doing at the beginning of the split. So overall, even if it wasn't a perfect, year from FPX, I think you have to be at least kind of okay. You have some players that you're excited about. Even if some players like LWX, Hang, Summit weren't perfect throughout the year, a player like Care really showed a lot of development throughout the year, and is someone who I think if you wanted to sustain the core, I think you could on this roster. I don't know if it would be the right idea, but I definitely think it wouldn't be the wrong idea. But for EDG, this is a great win. This is expected. They should be able to win against FPX here. This puts them in a situation against RNG that we will detail at the end of the episode here, but what a great series from Viper and Mako. Obviously, we knew that they were the keys to this EDG team. They've been given the keys to the kingdom, and they absolutely came through here. Viper's my player of the series. He was awesome. Mako was also awesome here. If these two play like this, they're going to give RNG a run for their money. I know everyone's talking about Viper Gala. It's going to be an absolute barn burner of a series. I am so excited to watch it. Hopefully, EDG can show up and be playing this kind of gameplay, because if we get that versus the reigning MSI champions, that could be one of the most fun series to watch in the LPL. But for now, congratulations to EDG. They beat FPX very, very cleanly and are moving on. With the first series done and out of the way now, we get to move on to our second series here of round 2. Of course, I am talking about Weibo Gaming taking on LNG Esports. A really interesting matchup, and a rematch of something we got relatively recently in the LPL regular season. LNG was able to take that. Were they able to repeat that performance in the playoffs here today? Well, let's check that out starting with Game 1 here. And Game 1 does go LNG's way as they pick up a pretty good win with a really fun comp overall. Really like the draft versatility that LNG is throwing out here, especially because it's Game 1 and you want to confuse your opponent as much as possible, and they absolutely did that. The triple flex here with the top 3 positions was super duper smart. You have the Sejuani, you have the Renekton, you have the Akali. Akali could go mid or top. Renekton could go mid or top. Sejuani could go top or jungle. Like, the amount of flexibility you have here, Sejuani gets flexed into the jungle. Tarzan's obviously played this a considerable amount of times over the year. And then you have Renekton and Akali that you can just move around depending on whichever matchup you feel like you can take advantage of more. They felt like that the mid lane matchup was going to be a little bit more advantageous for Renekton to be in. Doanby gets to play the Renekton, something he's very good at. We've seen that multiple times throughout the years. And Ollie gets to play the Akali in the top lane. That's the benefit that having a player like Doanby on your team gives you. I know a lot of people have been talking about how Doanby has been a negative for LNG this year, and while certainly at points of the year I would agree with that, you still have things like this that other teams just can't do, because how many mid laners are going to feel comfortable enough to pull out Renekton in a playoff series? How many top laners are going to be able to pull out Akali in a playoff series? That's what I love to see about LNG, the draft flexibility, and it super worked for them here. The Renekton dominated the mid lane. Doanby was great into Angel here. That is a matchup that I was really worried about on the side of Weibo Gaming. That and the jungle matchup were the two matchups I was most worried about. Angel got obliterated in this matchup on the Lissandra. The Renekton was able to do whatever he wanted early game, was able to pair up with Tarzan on the Sejuani, a more passive pick, but something that can still really work to influence lanes in the meta and definitely will scale into the late game. You pair those two picks up, you have a Lucian Nami to secure the early game advantage in the bot lane, even if it is with a Renekton. I think you definitely have the Akali and the Sejuani to help out in the late game. I think this is a really smart draft, and it was executed super well. Doanby is definitely able to help out. He moves on with Tarzan, helps Light get ahead. Ollie does a phenomenal job of obliterating the Shy in the top lane. Definitely something we're going to talk about. But overall, everybody on LNG looked really good in this game. They just looked better than their counterparts. Whether that be Ollie better than the Shy. Whether that be Tarzan better than SOFM on a losing matchup. Whether that be Doanby into Angel flexing the Renekton. Light and Lumao destroyed Wanfang and On. Even if, they didn't have the worst laning phase, they scaled infinitely harder, and honestly, I would expect Light to be the better player anyways out of those two. So, a really good showing in Game 1. Doanby's going to get the player of the game for me. The Renekton pick was just too big, although I think you could realistically give this to Ollie in the top lane on the Akali as well. A very good game from him, just a few mistakes from him overall. Not the best farming either. The Shy's still having some CS leads in this game, which shouldn't have even been possible, but Doanby did a really good job, I think, of controlling the map and dominating on the Renekton. But then you also have Weibo, who did not have a very good game. Dead of the game goes to the Shy. I don't think I have to explain that too much. He was 1-8-1 on the Gwen in the top lane, but this is what I'm talking about with the Shy, where, like, obviously everyone knows that when he loses hard, but this is kind of a playoff track record for him. He has won one playoff series ever since Jackie Love left Invictus Gaming. That is not a good track record for somebody who's been on talented teams with talented players. And it's because of performances like this. In a playoff series, when you are specifically prepping every single day to go into this matchup, you know, like, he's a player that can get taken advantage of. And we saw that in game 1 here. The Akali pick threw him completely for a loop, and he got destroyed in the lane matchup. I think similar things could be said for SOFM and Angel. Maybe not to the extent of the Shy, but still they didn't play very good games at all. SOFM on the Vi is in a winning matchup here against the Sejuani. Sej should never really be able to contest the Vi for a lot of early objectives. And yes, she will scale, but the Vi should be able to get a lot of map pressure from it. But no, SOFM just farmed the whole early game. So I don't really understand what exactly the plan was there. Angel obviously got thrown for a loop, having to play into Renekton in the mid lane, but there's really not much he could have done about it. I don't blame him too much. Hwanfeng and On were really just not in a spot to even compete in this game. Overall, it's very disappointing to see Weibo come out pretty much exactly like I expected them to, which is in the sense of when you have these players that are really easy to game plan against, you have to be the one to throw the curveballs. But instead they come out and they just expect everything to be hunky-dory, they expect everything to go their way, and they just get completely embarrassed in game 1 from it. And hopefully this is a wake-up call that they need to do something, or else this game plan is just going to continue to be exacerbated and continue to be a problem for them. And we'll see in game 2 here if they are able to turn around. But moving on to game 2, it's another LNG win. And honestly, it's a very similar story. It's Doinb on a flexible pick, Tarzan back on the Sejuani, which they can always flex into the top lane if they feel like that's a good matchup. But Tarzan did such a great job on the Sej into Vi that they're just like, screw it, we'll just go back to it. They get the Jax for Ale in the top lane to even more abuse a side lane matchup, and in panic mode at this point, Weibo goes to Ornn for the Shy, which is not a pick that he is all that comfortable on. They stick with the Vi, and they try to go all in on Hwanfeng in the bottom lane, and it just does not work. Again, this top side gets abused. And this is what I'm saying. It just feels like Weibo, they have their strategy, right? And it's so inflexible that when it doesn't work, it's clearly not working. And they got obliterated in this game. It was not close. Doinb's going to get my player of the game again because he destroyed Angel in lane on the Yone into Ahri, which isn't even that bad of a lane for Ahri, if I'm being quite frank. But he was able to affect the rest of the map so much, even with Hwanfeng and On. Honestly, not playing all that bad in the first 2 games, it doesn't matter, because the rest of the map is losing so hard, and then all of a sudden you have a fed Yone in your lane, and like, what are you going to do as an Aphelios in that situation? So, Doinb plays really, really well in this game. Tarzan, again, with a phenomenal performance on the Sejuani. Again, I still think Vi is favored in this matchup, especially for early aggression, but SOFM plays it so passive that by the time that they get to the point where they want to fight, you're fighting a fed Yone and a Sejuani with actual tank items. Like, you can no longer kill them. And SOFM looks like the fool for it. He's going to get my dud of the game here. Not looking good at all. But Tarzan does a really good job, again, in this matchup to minimize problems and to maximize efficiency. Going to the Sejuani has honestly been a huge pick for Tarzan. This is a pick that he's honestly been great on for so many years. People can remember back to the Griffin days when he used to play Sejuani all the time to give players like Chovy a lot of room to be expressive. He goes back to it here, even if it's not the most meta jungler. Clearly, it's a good pick. It scales really well, and honestly, the clear really isn't even that bad. Sejuani is a good jungler, even if it's not being played. It's just disrespectful to not try and take advantage of your windows like that, which is what SOFM did. But Ale in the top lane definitely got a little greedy at points and definitely died a little more than he had to. But again, he abused the Shy. He was winning in this matchup overall, which he should. It's Jackson to Ornn. You picked a losing matchup again for the Shy, and now he's put in another rough spot. And when the Shy's put in a rough spot, it's not like he's just going to play safe. I don't understand the Ornn pick at all here. Light and Lumao were fine in the early game. They didn't really play all that great. They didn't play all that bad. Again, Lucian Nami, just to apply pressure. By the time that, Aphelios is supposed to come online, everybody else on Weibo has already lost. And so, it didn't really matter. Like I said, Doenby gets player of the game again. His Yone plays were phenomenal. His mechanics have just improved so much, I think, over the course of his confidence building in the last half of the season. His pairing with Tarzan, I think, has improved a ton. They've been able to help out the bot lane a lot more, and that's given Light and Lumao more of an opportunity to play a little bit safer and not, especially for Light, have to do everything for this LNG team like it really felt like he was doing for a good portion of the regular season. I really like how LNG have played this series so far, and I'm really hoping they carry it in. But then you move over, like, I've already talked a bit about Weibo. Angel played this bad, but, you know, whatever. SOFM played this stupid, but that's the second game in a row. The Shy gets caught out multiple times over and over again on Ornn, and he doesn't really play Ornn well in teamfights either. Huanfeng and On were trying their best to salvage the game, but like I said, by the time Aphelios and Lulu are able to actively contribute against a Lucian Nami, the rest of his team had already lost the game. And so it was just really, really disappointing to watch. I want to see some bounce back. The Shy needs to be on something aggressive, but SOFM needs to play something that can help him. And he needs the counter pick, quite frankly. Like, let him get the counter pick. Let him get a lane matchup he feels like he can win. You can play towards that. SOFM can play towards that. Don't give him the opportunities to just get counterpicked and get ganked over and over again. And then let Doenby do whatever he wants on the map. You're putting yourself in such a negative position, but the team's confidence is so far down at this point because, quite frankly, Weibo all of this year has only had one strategy, and if it's worked, they won, and if it hasn't, they've lost. And I think they're getting found out for that right now, but that's game 2. We move into game 3 now, and game 3 was a Weibo win, but it wasn't a traditional Weibo win. They did change up their strategy a bit. They go to Senna Yasuo in the bottom lane, something that they really haven't played at all this season. They go to the Renekton in the top lane. Ale counters with the Scion. I think that's relatively okay for Ale, but in the end, the Shy still gets a pick that he can at least do something on, and Ale is relatively non-existent. But really, this game is all about Angel in the mid lane. Angel had a very, very good game on the Ahri. He was able to outplay Doenby. They put Doenby on the Akali, something I'm not a huge fan of, mostly just because Doenby is this macro player. I think he's someone that wants to get a lead in his lane and then translate that. And I just don't know if Akali does that in the same way that maybe some other assassins do. Sylas was on the board, and I think Sylas would have been a little bit more proactive here as a pick, maybe doing a lot of the similar things that Akali wants to do, with just maybe not as offensive of a focus. But overall, I think the Akali pick is fine generally. Angel was just able to play the Ahri matchup a little bit better. He was able to get super far ahead, and then he basically did what Doenby had been doing the last few games. He paired up with his jungler, who had been doing relatively okay in the early game on the Wukong, to go and help out the bot lane, to go and help out the Senna, to go and help out the Yasuo, even though there were certainly plays in that game that did not go On's way on the Yasuo. I at least like the effort for trying something like this, and quite frankly, they pulled it off. Even if it wasn't perfect, they did pull it off. Light was ahead in that bottom lane matchup. He did have some kills on this area, but they were able to neutralize it, they were able to push forward, and they played really well. Angel definitely deserves the player of the game for this, because he dominated the laning phase, and was a huge reason they were in that game in the first place, and they were able to teamfight. But you gotta give credit to SOFM as well. I've been really hard on him, but he finally goes away from the Vi, picks up the Wukong, which looks a ton better, plays it into Tarzan's Trundle, and honestly just dominates the matchup. The Trundle pick I don't love into Wukong generally. I think it can work into something like an Ahri, but especially later in the game, I just don't love it. But you pick up the Wukong, you pick up the Renekton. These are picks that I think are a little bit more on the side of what Weibo wants to do in the game. And it definitely worked out for them, in my opinion. You have some plays bottom lane. Huanfeng, you put him on a more supportive pick here in the Senna. I think that can be good. I still would like to see Huanfeng on some more carry picks, because I think he has been a very good player for Weibo. But if you want to push this narrative of Angel going forward, and kind of surprising LNG, which they did, which has put a lot of resources into Ahri here, which I don't think LNG was prepared for, then I think the Senna pick honestly works perfectly for that. They were able to get to a point in the game where that Yasuo was a problem, and Ahri obviously was going to blow up pretty much anybody she hit. So, you know what? Shout out. This was the draft I was looking for Weibo, and I think they executed on it well. As for LNG, like, I've already said that I don't think this is the worst game in the world, but I've already said I don't like Akali on Doenby. I think something like the Sylas would have fit a little bit better here and may have accomplished a very similar trait of being able to take over the game, but also I think offers a little bit more of that macro flexibility, offers a little bit more of the utility, and I think overall it's just probably the better pick here than Akali. You have the Scion in the top lane, which honestly I'm just not a fan of. I think especially into Renekton, it's so passive, it's so safe. You get to the point in Ale where you're just kind of hoping that you can late game team fight, but you have a Zeri Yuumi already for some late game team fighting. You might as well just go full tank there. If you want to go for that, go for the Ornn. Like, I just think it's probably the better option here generally. But, you know, Scion comes out here and it's it's not that good. And then you have Tarzan, who I think honestly just got out-jungled in this game. The Trundle really wasn't a great pick, I think, overall into the comp. I don't think it's his fault, because Trundle's very blind pickable. I'm not going to sit here and be like, he should have known, but Trundle's just not super great, unfortunately, into what they want to do. There's a lot of people that can just straight up dash over his pillar, making it basically null and void. I get the slow is still really good, but honestly, there's so much damage on the enemy team that Trundle's, like, quote-unquote tankiness is really not all that important. Like, who does he ult here? Does he ult Renekton? Does he ult Wukong? Neither are really going to be all that tanky, and it really gives you a lot less options for the front line. So unfortunately, Tarzan getting out jungle, just not scaling really that hard. He's going to get my dud of the game here. And then Light and Lumao honestly played the laning phase pretty well here, as they've done all series long, even if they haven't been, like, super great, like, you know, like, dominating in the same way that Doenby was. They played the early game laning phase kind of fine here on the Zeri. It's a matchup that they should have won into the Senna Yasuo, and they did. And they looked good doing it. Unfortunately, it just got to the point where when you have a fed Ahri, sometimes Zeri can still be really hard to carry with if you don't have that secondary threat or that hard CC to really lock down the Ahri. And they just don't have that outside of the Yuumi ult, and that's really unpredictable. Like, Ahri can just actually ult out of it. So, you know, a little bit of a difficult game for LNG to win, but it's not a panic button yet. I definitely think there were some things they did wrong, but Weibo honestly just drafted really well in this game, and it was a significant upgrade to what we had been seeing in the first two games, in my opinion. But that's game 3. Moving on now to game 4. Can Weibo continue the trend and push it to a game 5, or is LNG going to finish off the series here? It's an LNG win, and both series today go 4, and that's pretty much what I expected. I think it's exactly what I predicted. So, yeah, a really good, solid LNG game here. A little bit different. They go back to the Akali Trundle, which again, I'm not a huge fan of, but they do go to the Gnar in the top lane, which I do like a lot more, into the Shy. Not only can it punish, but it can also scale if you don't want to punish. And then you go to the Zeri Yuumi, because it did kind of work there in the game 3. Kind of running it back a little bit, and you just played a lot better. Even if Doenby wasn't perfect this game, I thought Tarzan played it significantly better on the Trundle. And I still don't think this is a great Trundle game, because you still don't have a lot of options to win, but quite frankly, Tarzan was just so much better than SOFM in this game that it didn't particularly matter. He took over the entire map, was able to impact the top lane, was able to impact the bottom lane. It didn't really matter. The Trundle was everywhere, and when you have good macro sense, jungle matchups mean significantly less in that sense. If Tarzan's just going to be this much of a better player, which he was. I want to give credit to Ale, who did play a really good series, punished the Shy considerably in the top lane in the first 2 games. Pulled out the Gnar here. Like I said, I like that pick significantly more than I like something like the Scion. I think it just gives you a little bit more agency as Ale to take advantage of the matchup or to scale. I think it gives you a little bit of both, which I think was good in this sense, even if I'm not the biggest fan of Gnar as a pick overall. And then Light and Lumao. They still played great. They're playing Zeri Yuumi into the Lucian Nami, which should be Lucian Nami favorite, at least for the early portion, but Light and Lumao did a really good job of creating problems there. Like I said, Doenby wasn't perfect this game. He certainly made some extra plays that he did not have to, but the jungle matchup was definitely tipped in his favor, and Tarzan was often there to punish Angel for positioning, and it just made the Azir pick not all that worth it in the end. So LNG looked really, really solid here, and, you know, much closer to the games 1 and 2 than games 3, even if it was on the game 3 draft here. And then Weibo, I don't hate the draft. It's just execution-wise, they weren't as good of a team. There's really no other way to put it. The Shy didn't show up in this series. He was really, really bad overall for Weibo. Even in their win, he wasn't all that great, and he got abused in games 1 and 2. So that's a problem. He's kind of your main carry on the team, so when he doesn't show up, that's bad. SOFM got completely out-jungled in this series. This was an awful game for him in Game 4. He had bad games in Game 1 and 2, especially Game 2, but somehow Game 4 was worse than all of them. He had absolutely no impact on the map on the Wukong pick and was just a complete dud for them. Angel had some good games. Honestly, he wasn't all that bad, and Huanfeng and On were honestly not all that bad. It was really the top side of this map that was a problem for Weibo, and basically cost them the series. The Shy and SOFM, you know, 2 players that haven't had the best track record of winning in recent seasons. SOFM, I've been talking about it all year, has been down all year long, even with the rest of his team playing well. He's just so passive and so safe. Same with Angel, that sometimes when the Shy and Huanfeng and On are playing up, they just don't have the backup to be able to do that. There is constantly people in their lanes to punish them, and SOFM, I think, is very much to blame for at least a bit of that, and he did not have a good series. But overall, you know, it's talking about Weibo's season as a whole, it's not the worst season of all time. They're definitely going to be disappointed that they couldn't win a series, but I mean, I predicted it. I'm currently sitting at 6-6, 6-4-6, I should say, in my predictions across both the LPL and the LCK. That's pretty good. I've yet to get one wrong. Hopefully that continues with both of the higher seeds winning in the LPL next week. We'll get to those matchups in a second, but Weibo losing here just kind of locks that in. I expected them to come into the series and get a little bit abused for the strategies that, quite frankly, you don't get the opportunity to really dig into in just a regular weekly series. In a best of 5, you can really dig into the fact that this team overextends and over-aggresses and punish them for it. And I think LNG did a very good job of that. Unfortunately for Weibo, that's going to be the end of their season. This actually knocks them out of Worlds contention as well. So no The Shy, no Huanfeng, no On at Worlds. It's going to be a little disappointing, but honestly, not surprising. This is a very fun team to watch because of their explosiveness, but at the end of the day, they're just not consistent, and they're honestly just not all that good. And so, probably for the best that we don't get to see them at Worlds. This win, on the other hand, for LNG actually locks them for Regional Gauntlet, for the Regional Finals, I should say, which is huge for them. This keeps their World stream alive, even if they lose to Victory 5 in the next round, which is going to be a very interesting series. I'm excited to preview that. They did a great job to get here. Tarzan and Doenby played a phenomenal series. Doenby's going to get my player of the series, but Tarzan's definitely a close second. Both of them played really great, and quite frankly, both of them are playing the best League of Legends that they played on LNG all year long. And hopefully they can keep that up, because it's a big matchup against V5 next series. Not next week, I should say, in just a couple of days here, but they're really going to need to step up and try to compete with a pretty stacked Victory 5 team. Doenby versus Rookie is definitely a matchup I'm looking forward to, but a great win here from LNG overall, and they're going to be very, very excited to move on to the next round and clinch their ticket in the regional finals. Well, all right, that's going to do it for my recap of the round 2 games here, the 2 round 2 series. Now it is time to get into some predictions and to get into some overviews of our upcoming matchups, our round 3 matchups, some certainly interesting ones coming up here. We got to start off with the big one. Top side of the bracket, the one everyone's looking forward to. We're going to preview them in their full extent here. Of course, talking about RNG, Royal Never Give Up versus Edward Gaming, the reigning world champions versus the reigning MSI champions, facing off in round 3 of the playoffs. One of them is going home. One of them is done in the playoffs after this. The other moving on to at least, at the very worst, losers bracket. So very, very good opportunity for both of these teams to prove that they belong, and I don't think you could ask for a more interesting matchup between these two teams. Obviously, RNG is yet to be seen in the playoffs. They found their way up to the 4 seed, although they had an opportunity to be even higher, and honestly, a pretty good shot to be even higher, and they kind of ruined it just a tad bit, but they get here to the 4 seed, and it means they have to play EDG. This is a very interesting matchup. RNG was able to take it earlier in the year, 2-1, although I think both teams are looking significantly different than what they looked like then. I think RNG has definitely shown a little bit more vulnerability in recent weeks, even in their wins, especially against a team like JD Gaming, than they had previously. And then I think EDG has solidified a playstyle and a foundation for what they want to do, and I think that's really helped them out a lot. So let's talk about some of the things in this series that I think could be interesting. The first thing that's going to pop out to a lot of people is going to be the mid lane matchup, Xiaohu versus Scout. Xiaohu is going to be the MVP for RNG. He came in second in my MVP voting in my regular season. He has been the engine that makes RNG move. We can talk about Gala, we can talk about Ming. It's Xiaohu. Xiaohu is the guy that they like to play around, and you can see it in the champions they pick. He picks a lot of Talia, a lot of Lissandra, a lot of Ahri, picks that can make an impact everywhere on the map. They like to focus their play through Xiaohu, and I think that's really helped them a lot. But you're going into Scout, who I think has had some ups and downs this split so far in terms of consistency. Like I said earlier, he was kind of rough at the beginning of the split when playing with JJ. I don't think those two had a very clear idea of what they wanted to do. Scout was very much on picks like the Corki a lot, and I just don't think that was beneficial to his game. I think once he started picking up more of like the Talia, more of like the Silas, I think that's really helped out a lot of what Scout has wanted to do. And I think Junjie has helped out with that a lot. Obviously, the Junjie versus Wei dynamic is incredibly interesting. I think Wei, while he's been good this year, I don't think he's been great. I certainly think he's been probably the weakest member of RNG over the course of the split. And I think Junjie has come in and basically revitalized EDG. He did a really good job of taking care of Clid in the FPX series that we just went over. And I think he could do a similar thing to Wei. It's definitely going to be an interesting matchup there. You've got a battle of kind of an aggressive top laner versus a more passive top laner. Flandre, definitely more known for his aggressive picks, the Gangplank, the Gragas, things that want to be a little bit more flashy. And then Breathe, definitely more of a tank player, at least on this roster. Definitely more of a Gnar guy. Sometimes pulls out that Gwen as well, but Honestly, Breathe has been a lot more passive in terms of his picks. I think now that he's gotten to RNG, a little bit different than the playstyle that Ben gave them earlier in the year. So it's definitely interesting. But all of this conversation is leading up to what is easily the most exciting matchup of the series. And of course, it's the key matchup. How could it be anything else? Of course, I'm talking about Gala versus Viper. Very well, the two best AD carries in the LPL. A super fun matchup to have here in the third round of all things. It's going to be really, really exciting to see which two can get ahead. I have Viper as my number 1 ADC. I have Gala as my number 2 ADC. Maybe not in the all-pro settings, but in terms of talent, I think these two are your go-to guys in the LPL, and I'm really, really excited to see how things work out. I do think the key matchup stats do kind of give you a little bit of a perception, though, on how these two teams have differed in terms of playstyle with these two members. I think Viper is the central focus of what EDG wants to do. He is the one that is going to carry. He's the one that's going to be given resources. He's number 1 in terms of all ADCs in KP percentage. 77%. That's ludicrous. Number 2 in damage per goal percentage. Number 3 in damage per minute. Number 4 in damage percentage in all of the league in terms of AD carries. Number 1 in KDA. It just shows you how dominant Viper has been and how important he has been to EDG's success. If they're going to win this series, it's going to have to be through Viper. Viper is going to have to beat Gala and dominate that bottom lane, get ahead so far, and be able to carry these teams in team fights. So it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. But on the flip side, you've got Gala, who's incredibly talented, but quite frankly, a little bit of an afterthought in terms of RNG's way of playing. He's number 13 in KP percentage. He's number 11 in damage percentage. While these numbers aren't all that far off from each other, really it just shows you that what I've been saying all year is kind of true. RNG doesn't really use Gala. Mako is a very good player, and I think he could be able to stop what Gala does. Ming is a very good player as well and could stop what Viper does, but Ming also doesn't often stay in the bottom lane. While Gala is a very good player, the big advantage that RNG has is that Ming and Xiaohu play super well together and link up with Wei to form a ton of macro pressure in terms of objectives. A lot of times going up to Herald, oftentimes just creating advantages in the jungle for Wei. Oftentimes, Gala is just kind of left on his own to do his own thing, and that's great, but that could be taken advantage of by the best bot lane in the LPL, in Viper and Mako, and so definitely something to keep in mind there. Gala and Ming are great and phenomenal, but definitely don't get the same kind of resources that Viper does. So are they going to pump some more into Gala to make sure that Viper doesn't get ahead? Is Viper just going to be given a ton of resources and is Gala going to keep up? Like, that's something that I'm really interested to watch. It's going to make this series fun, no matter who comes out as the victorious team, and I'm really, really excited to see it. I'm pretty sure everybody in the world is excited to watch this matchup, and quite frankly, I think the winner of these two, like going up against each other in these 5 games, could very much determine which team moves on to the top 4. Moving on to our second round 3 game here, and our second of matchups to decide who makes it into the top 4. We talked about the interesting one. Let's get into one that could be even more interesting if things go right. Of course, I am talking about Victory 5 taking on LNG Esports. We saw LNG be able to get past Weibo, be able to execute on a lot of their weaknesses, and a lot of their star players are picking up at just the right time. Can Victory 5 say the same? That's a little up for debate, because at the beginning of the season, Victory 5 was absolutely rolling. Even without Rookie, this team looked genuinely unbeatable. They hit a little snag in the middle of the season, but bounced back pretty well in Week 10 to take one of the few games off of Top Esports that they've lost all year long. So, is Victory 5 coming into this with confidence? I don't know. They're kind of both on a hot streak and on a cold streak. It's very weird to say, but they've solidified their lineup now, or at least it really feels like they have with Zhao and Bao in there in the jungle. Karsa is on the bench. Whether or not I agree with that decision, I do agree with the idea of solidifying that before playoffs. Mixing and matching I don't think is helpful for your team. Victory 5 was able to take their matchup in the regular season, but like I said earlier, these were very, very different teams when these two played. And it's certainly very different teams now, even after the playoffs started. The LNG that we've been getting recently has been the best possible version of them that I think we could have gotten. So, what are the interesting matchups here? Well, again, I think a lot of people are immediately going to look to Rookie versus Doenby. And I don't see why not. Like, these are two of the greatest players in LPL history, and they're going up against each other in the playoffs here. It's going to be a blast to watch. Doenby has really, really locked it down in recent weeks. Obviously, he had a great Week 10, but he's continued that in the playoffs. He looked very, very solid against BLG, and then he dominated. He was the player of the series, in my opinion, against the series against Weibo. If he can keep up that pressure, this is going to be a very fun matchup. Rookie obviously is the heart and soul of Victory 5. He is the guy that they love to play through. Very similar to what I just talked about with Xiaohu, except a little bit different. I think with Xiaohu, even though he's on picks like the Talia and picks like the Lissandra, they're actually pretty willing to give him resources typically. Even though it's not quote-unquote optimal, he plays those champions so aggressively and so well that he can often do carry-type damage numbers on Talia. Rookie is not that way. Oftentimes, Rookie is playing that more supportive backseat role for players like Fodic, for players like Zhao Bao. And that can be good, that can also be bad, because you're going up against two of the more proficient players in those two roles in the league. Tarzan is legendary in terms of how he has been able to play the jungle position. Obviously, not the best year of his career, but, I mean, look at this past playoff series. He obliterated and abused SOFM. He could do the same thing to Zhao Bao, and Rookie might not have a ton to say about that. And then you're going up against, in my opinion, the second-team All-Pro bot laner here in Light. I think you could make a real case that Light is just as good as Fodic is, and I know a lot of people hate how low I am on Fodic, but Fodic's a good player. He's just not a top 1 or 2 AD carry in the region. He's a top, 3 to 5 AD carry in the region, and I think Light falls directly into that line of fire as well. It's not going to be just as simple as we have the better players, let's get ahead. You're really going to have to come up with a good strategy, and I think a lot of that is going to be surrounding Rookie, and it's going to be surrounding PP God. A lot of that is going to be, can those two really impact the map as much as they want to, or is Doanby and Tarzan as a duo, are they going to be the ones that are actively making plays, that are pushing forward in the bottom lane, that are getting Ale ahead in the top lane? Another thing that I didn't even talk about, Ale versus Rich. Rich is a great team fighter, but Ale is someone who can absolutely abuse Rich in lane. It's a meme at this point, but Rich really is not that good of a laner, especially compared to the top-tier LNG top laners. And Ale, we just saw abuse a bad laning phase from the Shy. He can do it again here with the Rich. With the Rich? What am I talking about? Anyways, it's certainly an interesting matchup that I think you could talk about being favored in LNG Esports way, but I really think a lot of it is going to come down to the matchup I was talking about earlier, and that's my key matchup of the series. It's going to be Fodic and Light here in the bottom lane. Both of these teams rely so much on their bottom laners to do a lot of the heavy lifting for them, most especially LNG, but V5 as well. Like I said, Rookie and PP God are facilitators. They need someone to be able to take the resources that they give out, and oftentimes that has been Fodic for Victory 5. Look at those stats. He's super high in KP, super high in damage percentage. The team feeds into him. I will say, Fodic is someone who has a history of not showing up in the playoffs. I'm not going to say that that's absolutely going to happen here, but it is something to keep in mind. If that does happen for him, then someone like Light is absolutely someone who can take advantage of that. Light's stats may not look nearly as imposing as Fodic, but let me tell you, he backs it up on film. He is the carry for LNG, or at least he was, for a majority of the season. They loved dumping resources into him, and especially when all the other players were not playing up to expectations, it was often up to Light to carry them out of the cellar, which he did. He's probably the reason they're in playoffs at all, and this is going to be a very interesting matchup. If V5 can pump Fodic full of the resources, I do have a lot of faith that he can carry, but Light does a really good job at minimizing damage, and if he can do that really well and get into the late game with an even lead, I'm not exactly sure that it's quite as simple as Fodic being the better player. I certainly think it's going to be an interesting matchup, and it could very well determine the series, but there's so many factors here between Victory 5 and LNG that could definitely determine it. I think these are two very evenly matched teams, especially if LNG is playing the way they did yesterday. And if they can come and play like that together, it's going to be one of the most hyped series of the playoffs. All right, that is going to do it for my round 2 analysis and my round 3 predictions. Up on the screen now, you're seeing the updated bracket. Whew, it's been a fun one. Certainly been a fun playoff so far. I'm really excited to have gone 4 for 4 in the LPL so far, but I've also gone 2 and 2 in the LCK. I'm hoping to continue that with RNG and Victory 5 wins coming up in the next couple of days. If that happens, I'll be very excited. Would not be at all surprised to see both of these games go 5 games, or both of these series, I should say, go 5 games. RNG EDG is going to be so close, and if Viper's just the best player in the series, I could definitely see them winning. And then on the flip side for LNG, I could definitely see a world in which V5 just doesn't have the firepower to be able to compete with an LNG team that's firing on all cylinders, with Doanby and Tarzan playing great right now. So definitely a lot of intrigue, probably the most intriguing round we've gotten in the playoffs so far in any region Definitely excited to watch those games, but if you guys are excited to watch those games too, and if you enjoyed the content that I put out here today, please go ahead and leave a like. It really does mean a lot. I put a lot in these playoff reviews. Obviously, I'm trying to get multiple out per day, multiple videos per day. So if you guys are enjoying what you're seeing on the channel, please go ahead and give it a like. Let me know down in the comment section below what your predictions are for this round 3 of games here, EDG, RNG, V5, LNG. I'd love to hear what you guys think down in the comments section below. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.